I'm Kate Poitevin, and I'm a local author. I'm actually from Coeur d'Alene. I was born there and went to high school at Coeur d'Alene High School, and moved over here about 30-some years ago. And I have written a book called Saving Chihuahua, and it's a fantasy that I wrote for my grandchildren, about my grandchildren, and they walk through a portal into a magical Celtic land where they bond with magical creatures. I have a picture of them here at what they looked like as I started this saga. And this is Gabe. He's the oldest at 13, and he bonded with a white stag. Taylor was 12 then, and he bonded with a dragon. Jordan was almost 10. She bonded with a flying horse. Zach was 8, and he bonded with a griffin. And Zane was 5 and getting close to 6, and he bonded with a giant wolf. When they got there, they found out that they had been expecting Taylor for 50 years, and he was going to save the world. They didn't expect him to bring help. And because he was expected to save the world, then he had to go ahead and do it. So, anyway, I started it out thinking I might get 50 pages if I was really worked at it, and it ended up with 600 because I'm Irish and I can't shut up. So I published it originally as one book, and it was big and heavy, and the print was too small to get it all into 600 pages. So I have recently broken it up into a trilogy. And that was almost as much work as it was to write it originally. I had no idea how hard that was going to be. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? I started it in 2008, and I never would have started it. Actually, in 2007, I think it was right about the time the last Harry Potter movie came out, we were in Athena, Oregon, and about to head out to go to the last Harry Potter movie. And I just got this idea, and I kind of jotted it down. And then I put it away, and a year later, a friend of mine, young girl who is also an author and a wonderful artist, and she designed all my book covers, and she wanted to start a writers group. And the first night, she called me the next morning, and she said, "Will you come to the next meeting, because the only people who showed up were young boys and old men." And she was very shy, and she didn't know how to deal with this. So I came to be someone for her to look at. And I thought, this is fun, maybe I'll start that story. And so I wrote the first 4 pages. The next meeting, everybody liked it and encouraged me, so I continued on. It only took me 6 years. So, but my husband said finally, we're going to kill the author if she doesn't get it done. So I finally got it out there. So, yes. No, I think I told them stories, and I read them stories. But what I did do, though, as I was writing it, the 2 youngest ones, Zach and Zane, would come to spend the night with me periodically, especially Zane. I had him every Tuesday night. And every Tuesday night I had to have something to read to him. So he followed through the entire book as it was written. And Zane got a little bit older, and he started getting interested in it, so I had to catch him up. And so the 2 of them actually not only followed along and supported me, but corrected me. And when I would read it to them, like one night I was reading something that Jordan, their sister, said, the dialogue I gave her. And Zach jumped out of the bed on his knees in front of me and said, "Grandma, Jordan wouldn't have said that." And so we had quite a few of those kind of things. And when he was 9, he would take the paper the next morning on the way to school and read it. And then he'd say, Grandma, I don't know how you really spell this word, but it doesn't look right to me, so I'm going to circle it. He didn't know about spell check. So I'd say, you go ahead and I'll check on it. But there were some challenges because each of the children actually also gain a magical power. And Zach at the time was taking Taekwondo. So I had him beat up a bunch of bad guys. And in order to do that properly, I had to do a lot of research on Taekwondo and what the different moves were and what they were called and try to choreograph it properly. So I had several little issues like that. But most of the characters, not all, but a lot of my characters are people that I know. Because I don't know if I was too lazy to figure out my own personalities, or if I just have friends and family that are so interesting that I wanted to put them in there. And everybody seemed to want to be a part of it. Oh, and the other thing was, when the book was done, Zach read it twice in a row. He'd already heard it once, and he read the entire thing 2 more times. So I think he's my best whatever. So, any other? The what? Oh, well, that was also a lot of fun. I let each of the kids pick what animal they wanted, and I let them name it. Except for Gabe, who he doesn't join until a few days after the kids do, because he spends his summers, or at that time he spent his summers in England with his dad, who was working there then, and he didn't get to go on the camping trip, which was our jumping off point. So he arrived from a portal in England, in Coventry. But, so I read him the first 4 pages, and I said, I want to put you in it. What kind of magical creature would you like? And he said, I'd like a flying frog. And I said, can we talk about that? So I said, I kind of envisioned you riding a white stag. Just go home and think about it. So they went home, and they live over in the Seattle area. And he and his mom got on the internet, and they researched white stags and found out that they're pretty wonderful thing. And then they researched very carefully names. Most of my other characters, too, if I would call them and say, may I use your personality in my book? And when they said yes, I'd say, what's your favorite Celtic name? So with the exception of one of the men whose name was already Mac McDonald, everybody got to choose their own name. No, I didn't. And it just didn't occur to me to do that. And now I think maybe it might have been kind of fun. But as each of the mythical creatures literally took on their own personality, as soon as now I don't know where Taylor got the name. He was the first one to pick his. And he said he wanted Jarth. I don't know what Jarth means, and I don't know where he got it, and neither does he, but Jarth is very famous around our household now. He was the first mythical creature they met. What was the question again? Oh, they just all had their own such strong personalities of their own that I don't think I could have put something else in. I write because the voices in my head make me, and my characters, my story took on a life of its own. Like I said, it was supposed to be 50 pages long, and characters showed up that I had no intention of having. They go, oh, hello, who's this? And one of my favorite stories, and my husband's heard this over and over, but each of the kids had a quest that they had to go on. They had to go to get some one of them went to get the fairies on board with the battle that was coming up, and Taylor went to Dragon Mountain, and Gabe went to find the deer, the king of the deer, so he could send the message out. If they would go along with it, they could send the message out to all the other animals. So as they're leaving there, he's warned that you're going to pass a lake, and when you get there, be very careful because there's a moat monster in there, and he's very dangerous. Because I wanted Gabe to be able to see one. I just wanted that to be for him. So they're walking along the side of the lake, and my intention was that they were going to get to the end of the lake where they go up a hill, and they'd turn around, and he would see the shadow of the moat monster, and he'd raise his head up, and he'd be so excited. And so we're walking along the trail, and all of a sudden, I find my fingers writing that the monster threw himself out of the water and across the trail. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And then he started talking. I didn't intend for him to talk. So I thought, well, now he's talking. I'm going to have to name him. What do you name a moat monster? And I felt breath right here. And I heard this deep, grumbly voice say, "My name is Gandlar." And all the hairs stood up on my arms and my head. And so I wrote Gandlar. And he said, "That will be 2 R's, please." And I hit the R, and he slid away. So I definitely do have voices in my head, and my characters not only take over the story, but they give themselves personality. I am working on a prequel right now. In the book, I wanted to tie, because the portal that the kids come through is not your usual Celtic portal because it's outside Spokane. So it doesn't get used a lot. But I wanted to make a connection, and there was that vision that said that Taylor was going to come and save the world. And they had waited 50 years. They didn't know when, but they'd waited 50 years. And so I invented this young girl who came through the portal 50 years ago and traveled through the land with a baby Jarth and did something for the king. I didn't know what she did, but she did something for her to leave a cauldron full of gold coins for the children when they got there. And her name was Ronnie. And so my friends, as I was writing it, the friends in my group kept saying, "Well, what did Ronnie do?" I said, "I don't know." And as I got closer to the end of this one, they kept saying, "You have to write another book because we want to know what Ronnie did." So this is Ronnie's story. And I've got her, I don't know, I'm 40,000 words or something into it. So, and I keep promising myself it's not going to take 6 years because there's only one of her. Because there was 5 of the other kids, it took longer because they had their quests and they all had things going on. So we'll see. Oh, and the hard part about writing this one is that all the people, when the kids were there, all the people who were old people, like the Kolyak that they live with for a while, and she's a healer, and Jordan stays with her and learns herbs and things like that. She and all of her friends that the children meet along the way are now teenagers in this book. So I have to call my friends and say, when you were 17, how would you have handled this? Because I want them to see themselves. So I've had them send me pictures of them when they were teenagers, and so it's been a really learning experience because a lot of them I didn't know when they were younger. So this is all new. But thank you for. My books are on Amazon, and unfortunately I have a minimum price. And so I did the minimum because it's higher than I wanted it to be. So, and I can't remember now. I think they've done them because there's a few page difference, not very many page difference. It's like anywhere between $10 and $12, the three of them. And mine, if you buy it from me, it's they're $8 or the whole set for $20. So, anything else that I should be? Oh, yes, I will do this one thing. I belong to 2 writers groups, and anybody who is interested in starting to write, I think the best advice I would ever give them is to find a group or 2 or even 3 that will be supportive and help push you along, because I would still be writing the first one if I hadn't had to have something to read every week. So one of them is Spokane Authors and Self-Publishers, and it's a big group, and it's not a critique group. It's we have speakers on this different subjects of writing, and we do, support each other. We just don't, when it's done, we buy it. But 18 or 19 of us got together last fall, and we published an anthology of short stories, and I brought some of those too, and they're $7. There's all sorts of genres in there, and this will be my lead-in to my guest tonight. I'm going to have a close friend and member of my Celtic family, fellow author. Fred Jessup is here, and we're going to talk a little bit about his books. And he sent me a bio, and I went over it and forgot to bring it. But I do know that he's a retired Episcopal priest, and he's been a drummer in pipe band since he was a teenager. I guess he's not doing that now. But how many years of the kirking? For 17 years, he's done the kirking of the tartan at the Highland Games in Enumclaw. And I'm sure that I had been passing him for years on the grounds until I met him just a few years ago, and we made that connection. So anyway, Fred, would you like to come on up? And there's a microphone right there for you. Oh, I was going to read from my story, but I'll do it later. I don't even need to. So this is Fred Jessup, and he has written, I haven't read 2 of his books, but Drummer Loves Dancer is, I have read, and I listened to him as he was writing it in our critique group, which is called the Tin Pencil, and I love the book. So welcome, Fred. Thank you. Oh, you want to flip it up and make sure it's on?
Hello.
That's better.
Hi.
So, and we can sit down if you'd like.
All right.
So even though I've known you for several years now, when we're together, we are critiquing books and not getting real personal. And I was wondering how you decided to start writing.
Well, about a year before I retired, I started getting the urge to write fiction. And I thought of writing short stories. So as soon as I retired, I started taking some courses, writing courses, at the community college, first at what's now the Redmond Technical College, I think it's called, and the creative writing. Then I took a 2-year extension course from the University of Washington on writing what they called commercial fiction. And then I took some other creative writing courses after that. So that was kind of the groundwork. And then I joined a couple of writers' critique groups over there. This was in Western Washington, in the Seattle area. So that's how I got started, and I got started writing some stories. I gave the first one, I just wrote some dialogue for a story and gave it to a friend who was a high school English teacher and was also had a bookstore at that point and was very interested, was in a men's book group, and he thought that the dialogue was very, very realistic, so that encouraged me. So anyway, that's how I got started writing. Then one of those short stories kept growing, and that's how Drummer Loves Dancer came into being. It just kept going. I didn't really think I could write a novel. That was too long. I didn't think I could handle that. So So that's how that got started. And it took me 10 years to finish Drummer Loves Dancer, and but then I kind of let it sit because it didn't quite make sense to me. I did approach some agents and some publishers and editors and sent them, the first 10 pages or the first 2 chapters or whatever they wanted, and they all sent them back, said it wasn't right for them. The standard rejection notice is, loved your work, but it isn't right for us at this time. So I got a lot of those. And I was then writing short stories, but what I discovered was that it was a lot easier to get nonfiction published. So for 10 years, I wrote a column every month for 3 Episcopal Church newspapers that covered the state of Washington, North Idaho, and South Dakota, areas where I'd served in the ministry. And those were true stories of God's grace happening in people's individual lives. And then one of those, I sold a little book that contained 13 of those stories to a church publishing house. Really the one time I've actually sold a book to a publisher. And they published that for several years. It's called Remembering Grace. Somebody asked me once, knowing my wife's name was Chris, did Chris know about grace? Yes, she does know about it. So Drummer Loves Dancer, the first actually fiction I had published was My Name is Tamar, which is a retelling of one of the chapters in the book of Genesis. One of the stories that tends to get skipped over in Bible reading, Bible study, because it doesn't seem to a lot of people to fit the pattern. It means, to me, it fits right in very well if you think about what's gone on in the story, but it tends to be skipped over. So I thought I would read it. I would write it. So if you want to know what it is, just read through the book of Genesis till you find Tamar. I'm not going to tell you which chapter. People have to got to get you to read more of the book that way.
Do it yourself.
But Genesis is not just all about Adam and Eve and Noah and that kind of thing, which most people remember most.
In our group, you teased us with some stories about your time at the Lakota reservation.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about while you were there?
Yeah, we were there on the Rosebud Reservation for 8.5 years. I had gone out there in the summer right after I graduated from college, the University of Washington. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army when I graduated, but my orders didn't have me reporting for duty until the end of September, 1st of October. So I had the summer free, so I went on a work camp that was sponsored by the Episcopal Church on the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota at Wakapala. And there were about 15 college students. Some were actually just graduated from high school, and I had just graduated from college, and then everywhere in between. We worked on various projects on that reservation for the church. We painted some buildings and did a little work with gravel on a road and things like that for whatever they needed to have done that summer. And we got a chance to meet people in the village. We were very fortunate to be living in a building that was called a school, but it was really just a home for children who were going to the public school in that town. People who lived so far out that they had their kids live at St. Elizabeth's and go to the public school in Wakapala. But the woman who was running that home at the time was named Ella DeLoria. Now her nephew, Vine DeLoria Jr., has written a lot of books became a lawyer, books about Native American rights and the assertion of those rights. Her brother, Vine DeLoria Jr.'s father, Vine DeLoria Sr., was an Episcopal priest, and he was my boss when I first went there, because having had that experience on the reservation, I thought about it the 2 years I was in the Army. I actually went back up there for 2 weeks in the summer of 1957 from Fort Carson, where I was stationed, and spent 2 weeks up there, 1 week with a priest going around and with him seeing what he was doing, and then a week with another work camp. It was on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And so I was really interested in going back there and serving in that area. So in the meantime, I met Chris. When I came home to Seattle for Christmas vacation 1957, and so we got corresponding a lot, and I suggested she might want to do a work camp in South Dakota to see what it was like. So she did. And they actually built a church in 6 weeks. This bunch of college students with not a lot of experience in that sort of thing, but working with some of the people in the village, they got this little church building built, and it's still there, as far as we know. So the result of that was, in 1960, Chris and I were married. 1961, I graduated from seminary in Berkeley, California, and we went to South Dakota. You might imagine there was a little culture shock. We moved from the San Francisco Bay Area to Mission, South Dakota, a town of 500 people, if everybody's home. And so that was quite a bit of a change. But we were there on the reservation for, that time, 4 years. Then I had the opportunity to go to Bozeman, Montana, and to study social and cultural change while working as the Episcopal chaplain at the university. And so I did it. And I stayed longer. I stayed a year longer than I thought I would. I was there for 4 years. Chris and I both got master's degrees studying social and cultural change. And then we went back we got called back to the Rosebud Reservation where we'd been before. We moved back into exactly the same house that we'd lived in before, 4 years later. 1st of September, both times. We left on the 1st of September. 4 years later, we came back on the 1st of September. Moved back into the same house. We had one more child by then. We had 3 by then. And then shortly after that, in 1970, we adopted our youngest daughter, and so we had all 4 children. And were there for another 4.5 years, and left in December of 1973. We came out to Cheney. But it was a remarkable time because the Lakota people had their own way of expressing their Christian faith. The church had sent a very wise bishop out there in the earliest days to minister to the people because there had been what was called the Sioux Uprising in Minnesota at the time of the Civil War. And because the government had not fulfilled their obligations to provide food and other things for the Native Americans who had signed treaties with the government in order to give up their land. And so there was an uprising. Some people were killed, armies sent in there, and they were going to hang a large number of Lakota men for this. But the Bishop of Minnesota, Bishop Whipple, went back and pleaded with Abraham Lincoln not to do it. And he got Lincoln to pardon most of the men that they were going to execute. Not all, but most of them. And there's now a book out called Lincoln's Bishop, which is the story of Bishop Whipple and Abraham Lincoln and how this all took place. Bishop Whipple then convinced the Episcopal Church to send a missionary bishop out to the Dakota people and to minister to them. And so he did, and he was a very wise man. People thought he was much too gentlemanly and so forth to fit in the rough frontier, but actually he was very wise, and he saw ways that the church could fit in with Lakota ways. And so he started a lot of things, and the result of which was almost 50% of the Dakota people in what's now South Dakota and parts of North Dakota became Episcopalians. And so we had a large number of congregations on that reservation, Rosebud Reservation. We had 15 little churches scattered around on the reservation. So the clergy all had more than one. We all had a number of chapels to serve, congregations to serve, most of which were all Native American, but a few of which were contained both Indian and non-Indian people. So it was a wonderful adventure. I learned wonderful things I tried to learn the language, but it's hard. I know words and phrases, but I couldn't really put a sentence together. But I got so I could understand. If I was in a meeting and everybody was speaking in Lakota, I got so I could understand what the gist of what they were saying, which was very good. And things that Ella DeLoria had told me in that first summer in 1956 when we were out there, I got to see some of those in action, even though some of those folkways were passing away. They still occurred, especially among the older people. One was the way grief was expressed. And one of the things that they did was they knew how to sing their grief. And a lot of people who hear it just think that people are wailing. They just think, oh, the women are just wailing. Well, they're not. They're actually singing. But they're crying while they're singing. And I remember once, the time I really understood it, I went with an older man. He was one of our lay pastors down in a very isolated community. And his brother had died, and I went with him to the wake because his brother was Roman Catholic. And so I went in, and I walked up to the coffin, open coffin with him, and he walked up there, and he put his hand on his brother's chest. And then he began to sing and cry at the same time, which is, I'm thinking, not easy to do. But he had a very strong voice, and he's singing, and I know he kept repeating, "Mi sun," and I know that what he was saying was, who will hunt with me? Who will, do these things that we have to do together? Who will be there to support me? Who will be there to look after the children? All the things that he will miss about his brother being gone. And repeating this, mi sun, younger brother, because you always spoke to people using the racial relationship term, cousin, father, whatever it was, tahashi, cousin, ate, father, tonkashila, grandfather, ina, mother, unchi, grandmother. You always said that word, and if you didn't say that, it was like you were not being polite, you were being rude. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience to be there and to share with those people, and I learned a good deal more than I was taught. I learned more than I taught by being there and seeing how people did that. Also, at one funeral, after the service in the church and the burial in the churchyard, we came back for the mourners to feed the mourners, which was the custom. After a funeral, everybody went back for a meal. We came to the house of the man whose wife had died, and there was nothing in the house. Everything was gone. And I realized what had happened to us. He had followed this custom where he gave away everything he had to show that his wife was more to him than anything else he had, that nothing else held value when she was gone. Now, he would be honored by the community for doing that, because one of the best things you could say about someone is to say, he or she gave without their breath quickening. In other words, he could give things away without breathing hard. And that because their society was built on giving, not on saving, not on accumulating, but on giving. And you got the most recognition, the most honor by giving things away. And that's how you honored people. You gave things away. And so that was a wonderful thing. You think of the values as Christians that we espouse, that's one of them, to be generous, to give. And they had that down cold in their culture. They know how to give.
They didn't have to be taught.
That's right. Yeah. They were very knew how to do that.
Would you like to read a little bit from?
Okay, these books don't actually touch on that very much.
No, but I want you to
yes.
Go ahead and.
Okay. Well, let me first read something from My Name is Tamar.
Would you like to use the microphone, the stand, instead up here, or can you hold it open?
I think I can. I think I can hold it right here. So, Tamar has been married. She's a Canaanite young woman, and she has been married to a young man who is actually Hebrew, because Judah has come to live among Canaanite people, and he has married a Canaanite woman, and this young woman, Tamar, has married one of his sons, whose name is E-R. If you want a name that would really fit well on a computerized program, that's a good one. 2 letters, you can't get less than that. The other happy times for me were the meals we shared with Judah's family. Sometimes Judah talked about his God. Listening to Judah talk about his God seemed to calm my feelings. Judah said his God was jealous of other gods, but he was also a just God. That surprised me, as I'd never heard anyone say our Canaanite gods were either jealous or just. People sometimes praise a god or a goddess as being just in a prayer to flatter that god or goddess, hoping to influence their actions. That god might really be just. That was a new idea for me. My father knew a lot about people from his business dealings, and he had always said, there is no justice, not among men or gods. They do what benefits themselves. Do not look for justice. You may occasionally find mercy in this world, but never justice. After we had been married almost a year, began to berate me, because she'd had no children. He told me one night that he would divorce me and send me back to my father, except that Judah would not allow it. Judah had told him, there is a reason that your father's God has not given you a child. You must examine your life. You must find what you are doing that displeases him and stop it. Without thinking, had snapped back, it's because you got me a Canaanite for a wife that I have no child. No, your mother is a Canaanite, Judah had said, and I have 3 sons. It is not your wife, it is you. There is something that you must change. As told me this conversation, he lowered his voice. My father suspects that I have gone to the fertility shrine. I just know it. He began to wring his hands. Maybe he's right, and you shouldn't be going to the shrine. Or maybe, do you know who will? Cut me off. No, I won't give up going to the votaries at the shrine. You're a woman and a Canaanite. You don't know a thing. Just shut up. I bathed his feet, rubbed oil on them, and said nothing. If it gave him relief, it was short-lived. He left the house in a hurry and did not return until very late that night. He smelled of wine as he staggered in the door and threw himself down on the bed. I went to lie beside him. I have a terrible headache. He pushed me away. Leave me alone. He turned his face to the wall, so I walked softly to the other side of the room and stretched out on the rug. I did not sleep well, worrying about being barren and having an unhappy husband. Early in the morning, I woke up and tiptoed to the bed to see how he was doing. It looked as if he was not breathing, and that frightened me. I reached out and touched his forehead. It was as cold as stone. I screamed, wake up! But he didn't move. Then, screaming and weeping, I threw myself on his body. So that is the first of her husbands to die. So that's just a bit out of My Name is Tamar. It is a fascinating story to me, and that's why I chose to expand on it and flesh it out, so it might see what it might have been really like for this woman to face the things that she had to face in her life and how she came through. The two brothers that she married. According to the customs at that time, if a husband died and had left no children, then the next brother was supposed to marry the same woman and produce a child or children for the dead brother. Well, in this case, when the second brother married her, he was not about to produce a child for his brother, because it would mean that child would inherit more than he would. So he wasn't about to do that. So therefore, he wasn't going to do it, and he didn't. And then he died. So then there was a third brother, but the father, Judah, was not about to give the third brother to this woman. Two brothers have died. I'm not about to give her the third one. So he stalls, and then she figures out how to get justice from him, how to get him to do the right thing, but she risks her life to do it. He might well have not done it, and she would have been killed. So that's the story. I brought Drummer Loves Dancer to read a couple of passages. I after 10 years working to finish it, and I wasn't satisfied really with it, realized the ending didn't really work for me. So I went back and did some revision, and in the process changed completely the way the novel ends. And so I might read you a couple of passages from that.
And you left it open to be able to give us another
Yes,
book.
And I'm working on the sequel
Yes.
now. Yeah, that's right. Because in one sense the story ends, but you have to kind of make some assumptions about what happened from the ending on. And
It can stand alone, but thank goodness we're so much enjoying being a part of you writing the next one. We're so anxious to see it, and I hope it doesn't take so long.
No, I hope not 10 years. I have about just over 42,000 words written in the sequel, so I'm hoping that's over half. But it's done in a different way. Drummer Loves Dancer is over the period of one summer. The summer of 1954 is when the whole book takes place. The sequel takes place over a number of years as their lives change and events happen, children happen, and so on. So here's a scene that I got a lot of fun out of writing. They have progressed to the point in their relationship where he's declared his love for her. She's holding out. She really likes him a lot. She will say things like, "I adore you," but she will not say she loves him. I should say, he's a local Seattle young man who's grown up there. He's naive in many ways, but he's Scottish American. He's very involved in the Scottish American community. He's a drummer in a pipe band. So as others in his family have been, and so she's from New York, from a family that's just in a sense isolated. She knows nothing about grandparents or cousins or anything. It's just her parents and her, and it's not a happy marriage between her parents. They stay together because they know how to make a lot of money in investments. So they've been successful with that, but everything else in the relationship is terrible. So they have very indifferent backgrounds. She's very sophisticated, and so she's gone through a period where she just seemed to change, and he couldn't really get through to her. She acts like she's talking about very superficial things when they talked about very serious things before. So he finally confronts her and wants to know why she's been acting differently than just the last week. They're walking along Green Lake in Seattle at night, and our feet made soft crunching sounds as we moved along the cinder path. She says, "What do you want to talk about?" There was no turning back. I felt my heart in my throat again. "Why are you acting differently?" Acting differently? It started Sunday. All this week you've been talking about stuff like clothes and gossip. And when I look in your eyes, it's like your eyes are looking at me, but you're not there. She stopped and faced me. "That's silly. Of course I'm looking at you. That doesn't even make sense." Still looking directly into her eyes, I said, "Yes, it does, and you know what I mean." "I don't know what you mean. Then for the first time ever, she avoided my eyes and looked down. "Just trying to tell you," her voice trailed off. I whispered, "Why did you look away?" She stood silent for a moment, then raised her head. Her eyes were blazing, and I saw her in them. "Damn you, that's not fair." At that moment, I saw only those beautiful eyes, and she was there. She sighed. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" She scuffed the ground with one foot. "From me." She put her arms around me. "I don't want to hurt you." It hurt to look in your eyes and not find you there. I pulled her closer, relieved that she was herself again. "Dancer, what's going on?" "I'll tell you, but let's sit down." We spread the blanket on the grass between the path and the lake. We sat down cross-legged, facing each other. Only our knees touched. The aquatheater lights were bright behind her. "I've been acting the way I have because that's me. That's the way I am sometimes. Shallow, vain, selfish, bitchy." She paused to let it sink in. Traffic noise rose and fell on Aurora west of us. I protested. "I don't believe that for a minute." "Well, it's the truth, and that's not all." Her voice rose in volume and pitch. "I also did it because sometimes it's just too damn hard to deal with your damn perfect life, perfect family, perfect Seattle, and your damn perfect God." "What?" I was totally confused. "What's perfect?" She pulled up a blade of grass. You're all perfectly what you are. Like you, drummer. You're perfectly yourself. You are the easiest person to get to know of anyone I've ever met." But I I don't understand. My insecurity reasserted itself. Are you saying I'm simple? She took my hands in hers. No, there's nothing simple about you, except you are what you are. Honest, naive, smart, funny, unsophisticated, provincial, and a little dense about women in spite of your sisters. You're perfectly you. That was the exact opposite of how I saw us. But you're the most amazing girl I've ever met. You're the perfect one. You can forget that. There's nothing perfect about me. She paused and let go of my hands. I know you think I'm pure and flawless, but I'm not, and I've been trying to show you that. I shook my head. What you've been doing this week, that isn't the real you. Yes, it is. She stopped and then held out her hand. I need a cigarette, drummer, please. I got out the pack, handed it to her, and then held the lighter while she lit up. She blew a long string of smoke into the air above us, looked down at her hands, and then finally back at me. See, I need a cigarette to settle my nerves. She paused. I told you I don't get along with my parents. It's more than that. For one thing, they don't even like each other. What keeps them together is their ability to make a lot of money picking smart investments. That's why I have a trust fund and don't have to worry about money. But they've had terrible fights and affairs. When I was little, they tell me nasty stuff about the other. It tore me to pieces. I cried, I wet the bed, I hid in the closet when people came. Stunned, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Without thinking, I took her free hand in mine. I can tell you, drummer, you're a lucky kid. You have a real family. When I was little, I would have given anything to hear my parents just once say, I love you, to me or even to each other. She was quiet then, looking away from me out over the lake, drawing on her cigarette. I let my eyes follow her gaze. Lights twinkled on the low surrounding hills reflecting in the lake. Gentle ripples on its surface mirrored the moon as a broken golden column. She faced me away and went on. It's not that my parents don't care about me. They do in their way, and as long as I'm beautiful and smart and make them look good, they can be quite charming to me. And I know how to please them. I stroked the thick braid of her hair. It makes me sad to think of you growing up that way. She stubbed out her cigarette on the bottom of her shoe and set the butt on the ground beside the blanket. That's why I want you to see the other side of me. I want off the pedestal you've put me on. So anyway, that's the kind of thing that goes on between them. And she, this is her take on Seattle. She says about Seattle, she says she wants to get back to New York, to the theater and the galleries, the energy, the excitement, the crowds, the egg creams, the blintzes, the lox and bagels in the village, pushy people, fancy parties, the bitching and the gossip, all of it. She jumped up, so I did too. She swept her arm in a wide half circle, as if taking in the lake and the surrounding hills. Seattle's not really a big city. You've got a few art galleries, but hardly any nightlife or theater. You haven't got an opera or a ballet, and people here aren't city people. They're too friendly and polite, and they drive slower. They don't even stop. They even stop for pedestrians, and they never honk their horns. Do your cars even have horns? I said, come on, we're not all that countrified. Jack Benny was just here on stage with Sammy Davis Jr., and the King and I is coming. Her wide-eyed look of mock surprise took over. Oh, I forgot. You do get a touring show every year or two. It's the Great White Way on Pike Street. She was really rolling now, and I had to laugh. And what excitement! Boeing test flies world's biggest passenger jet. Slow-mo races for Gold Cup. Again. Miss Ballard crowned Seafair Queen. She clasped her hands together over her heart and rolled her eyes in exaggerated rapture. Oh, be still, my beating heart. I grabbed her and started tickling. She laughed and tried to push me away. Leave me alone, you uncouth Western lout. I put my arms around her. Us Western louts ain't uncouth. We is couther than all get out. So anyway, that's...
How much time? 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay, I forgot that I was going to read a little bit. And this is kind of something I'd almost forgotten about until I was flipping through this morning. I mentioned Mallory, who is the artist that did my covers and the one who got me started to writing. And of course, she was the first person that I gave a character to. And Mallory is a beautiful 5'11". And of course, I made her a fairy. So she is taken up with Taylor, whose magical power is magic. And he doesn't know what to do with it. And when she first started talking to him, she was upset at him because he didn't understand any of the spells because he hadn't read the books. And he couldn't understand what she was talking about until she said, you know, about the boy who died. And I've put in sprinklings of Harry Potter all through the book because, you know, that's how I started it out. But in this part, they're having to travel, and she's been giving him lessons and trying to help him get control of his power, which isn't working a lot. But she's going to, she's going to ride along with him on Jarth to where they're going. At Taylor's urging, Skylar had agreed to ride along with him so that she could continue to teach him. She had carefully folded her wings and slipped into the back of his jerkin with her arms around his neck. At first she was terrified. She had never flown so high above the ground. Fairies seldom flew any higher than the treetops. Until she got used to the rhythm of the rise and fall of Jarth's wing movements, she was sure that she was going to be thrown out into the air at any moment. Time was running out, and there was still much Taylor needed to know. Now that he had control of his power, he didn't need so much practice as just remembering what spell, hex, or jinx did what and their proper pronunciation. With her cheek against his ear, she repeated his lessons until she was sure he understood. Each time he faltered, she would sigh and mumble, if only he had read the books. I know, he finally said. I'm sorry. How was I supposed to know I'd really need all that stuff? You were told, she answered. You said your grandma told you to read the books. Yes, but she didn't say I'd be coming here. How could she know? It has been my experience that when one's grandmother speaks, one should listen. They don't get to be old by not learning anything. Mine have taught me many life-saving lessons. She paused and then added sarcastically, it has also been my experience. They are only too happy to share that knowledge. They both chuckled at that observation. Seriously, though, she said, I don't know about your grandma, but many of the grandmothers here do know things. If she were from here, she might very well have known that you would need certain information and have wanted you to be prepared. Grandmothers here would have just expected you to do as you were asked with no need to tell you why. Taylor chuckled. Well, obviously my grandmother isn't from around here. Anyway, if she had known about this, that I was going to come here, I can assure you that she would have nagged me to death to learn the spells. She would have taught me them herself. She's not really one to let things come about on their own. If it's important, she'll ride it all the way. She makes us all crazy with her nagging. Skylar pinched his ear. How dare you speak of your grandmother like that? Ouch! It's okay, really. She knows she's a nag, and she knows it makes us crazy. She also knows we love her more than anything, and we know she only nags us because she loves us just as much. Well, still, there had to be a reason she wanted you to read the books. How many times did she tell you to? Only about 100 or 2. Sounds like nagging to me. So it looks like our time is about to come to end. Fred, thank you so much for allowing me to have you here. I am so excited. Fred is the senior member of our Tin Pencil Writers Group, and we all love him and look up to him, and we all think he's a fantastic writer. And I am so honored that you would come and be a part of this with me.
Thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate being here.
Good.
Good
Thank
opportunity.
you. And thank you for bringing your family and friends. And I still have 5 minutes. Anybody have any more questions to fill up 5 minutes? I guess I read that faster than I thought I would.
Oh, okay.
The one you didn't have a part, have anything with.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those of you who can't see off camera here, is this Fred's sister is telling us that she likes his Remembering Grace story the best. And his wife had a question.
In this one? Sure, I'll just read a little teaser from this this couple, which is at the SeaTac airport waiting to receive a child from Korea. They've put in to adopt a child. They have two little boys. They were obviously fertile, so they went to adopt from Korea. And this little girl is arriving on the airplane, so here's what happens. They're waiting. These babies are being brought up by these women are carrying them off the plane, and they see these names showing up, and they're waiting. Their name, by the way, the name is Olson, which happened to be Chris's maiden name. This is the family. So it's being spoken by the father is talking, and he says, "Careful, boys, you might bump someone, and pick up the sign." Our boys stopped jumping for 3 seconds, grabbed the sign, and they were unable to contain themselves. They started jumping again. And then the most beautiful female I'd seen since the day I met Gina arrived. A tiny girl, black hair, pink dress, face buried in the shoulder of the smiling woman who carried her, and the tag that said Olson. I glanced at Gina and saw her huge smile and tears, and she was murmuring, "My baby, oh, my baby girl." The woman carrying Kim's son was still 40 feet away when the little one raised her head and glanced around. Her eyes met Gina. The two looked at each other, and time stopped. The child didn't take her eyes from Gina's face as Gina repeated, "My baby girl, filia mia, my daughter." Kim's son was closer, 20 feet away as Gina raised her arms. Then the child stunned us all. She leaned away from the woman carrying her and reached out to Gina. "Oh, bella bambina mia," burst from Gina like an aria. It was only an instant, and it was forever, before the woman came to us. Kim's son practically jumped into Gina's arms, wrapped her arms tight around Gina's neck, and tried to wrap her short legs around Gina's body. Tears washed down Gina's face as she hugged our little girl and repeated, "Thank you. Oh, carissima, filia mia, my darling little girl." So that's...
Well, oh, Fred, yours are on Amazon too, aren't they?
Yes, they're all on Amazon, and locally in Spokane, they're also available at Auntie's bookstore and at Second Look Books. And I hope maybe some other bookstores soon.
And again, his name is Fred Jessett, so you can look that up. And I'm Kate Poitevin, and I'm also on Amazon. And thank you again, Fred. And thank you for our audience for being here and helping us out, and for everyone up in the rooms watching. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.